This weekend's DIY project is replacing the rear axle seal by the differential on the left-hand side on this 2010 Mercury Mariner. Let's take a look underneath so we can see where this leak is coming from. So you can see that there's some oil in this area here where the seal is, and what I've seen was oil actually leaking out of this thing, dripping down the differential and onto the floor. The first thing you want to do is jack the car up and rest it on jack stands and remove the wheel, and then you want to take this nut off here. What you do before that is check to see if you have rust on these threads. Most likely you will. If so, just take a wire brush and clean it off. This will help prevent any damage to the threads while you're removing this nut. So this nut here is a 32 millimeter. What I usually do is use an impact gun, and it comes off pretty easy. If you don't have an impact gun, what you can do is you can remove the center cap of the rim here. That'll give you access to that nut. What you want to do is put the wheel back on, put about 3 lugs, tighten it up, and then lower the vehicle. And then you can use a socket with a breaker bar to get that nut off. Next, I remove the spare tire to get it out of the way. Then we remove the shock absorber, the upper control arm, the lower control arm, and remove the knuckle. I put some penetrating oil on there to help remove those nuts. They look pretty rusted on there. So next what I did was I put my jack underneath the shock absorber to give it some support, and then we're going to remove this bolt here, which is 24 millimeters. Next, we want to remove this bolt here for the upper control arm, which is 19 millimeters. Then what you want to do is get a hammer and pop that bolt out. Next, you want to take this bolt off here for the lower control arm, which is also a 19 millimeter. Then after you take this nut off, then tap that down with a hammer. Okay, the next thing to remove is this nut right here, which disconnects the torsion bar. Sometimes the nut keeps spinning with the bolt. If that's the case, just use the hex holding feature of the bolt to assist in removing the nut. The next thing you want to do is remove this bolt right here, which is the bracket for the brake line. We had to remove the brake parts in order to get the brake line out of the way, and we secured it up out of the way, tied it up with a wire. And there's another video for that, show you how to remove and replace the brake parts. But I just want to stress that once you remove the brake line, you must bleed the brakes before you put the car back on the road. Next, loosen the axle from the hub using an air hammer. So to remove the front part of the axle from the hub, we're going to take a porta power and hook it up to the frame and to the bottom of the knuckle here. This whole piece here is flexible, so with just a little bit of pressure, we're able to get some clearance and slip this axle out of the hub. Secure the porta power to the frame and the knuckle and give a few pumps, just enough to clear the axle out of the hub. Once the axle is free, release the pressure from the porta power. Now that we have the axle removed from the knuckle, we can remove it from the differential. And what I do is just take a crowbar and pry it out like this. Now that we got the axle out, what we can do is just get a screwdriver and try and pry this out here. There's a lip here that you can just get a screwdriver and a hammer, try and break that seal away. You want to clean this seal off. I want to get all this gook out of here. Just scrape it off with a screwdriver. It's kind of hard to get up in there. I have this bracket here that's making it difficult. You want to clean this off the best you can. Remove all that sealant. This is the new seal. I recommend getting an OEM seal to assure a good fit, because if it's leaking, you don't want to have to remove all the suspension parts after you had reinstalled them. You want to get that new seal in as straight as possible, and then use a seal driver to knock it in really straight. Keep tapping it in until it's flush with the seat. And it should look like this. Nice and flush with the seat all the way around. Once you have the axle ready to go into the differential, what you want to do is spin the axle to make sure that the teeth mesh up with the gears inside. Once that is meshed together, then you just push the axle in until you hear a click. In the front part of the axle, you want to do the same as the rear. You want to make sure that the teeth mesh up with the hub. What you do is just spin the hub around and push in the back of the axle, and then once it locks up, the teeth are meshed together. Once the shaft is properly seated in the hub, we put back the upper control arm, lower control arm, the shock absorber, and the stabilizer bar. The stabilizer bar and the control arms are tightened to 46 foot-pounds, and the shock absorber is tightened to 129 foot-pounds. Now don't tighten the lower control arm. We put the wheel back on, lower the vehicle, and then tighten it once the vehicle is resting on the ground. Put some thread lock on there and tighten this nut to 214 foot-pounds. If you don't have an impact gun, reassemble all the brake parts and have someone press on the brake pedal, then tighten the nut. Do not tighten this nut with the wheel back on and the vehicle lowered to the ground resting on its own weight. Now that we got all the parts back together again and the vehicle is lowered onto an even ground, we come here to the differential and we remove this filler bolt here, and we're going to put in 80W90 gear oil, and we're going to fill it up to this line right here. And once you start seeing the gear oil come out, then you put the filler cap back in and tighten that to 20 foot-pounds. Now you're all done. Check your work and test drive the vehicle.